Hello everyone and welcome back to my office. As you can see, I am actually in here today, despite the fact that it is Friday. One of the reasons I'm in here today is because Blackboard just didn't want to get along with me this week, and apparently the videos I recorded in Blackboard did not actually get to you. So thanks to you who did email me and let me know, so that I can make sure that you got this video this week, and of course you'll get a new one next week. The last time that I gave you an assignment, which was, believe it or not, just last week, it was a reading assignment. It was a pretty heavy reading assignment, but I really wanted us to start to understand how much the study of political communication has changed over decades, and what that means for things like this class. One of the things I always say is that political communication scholars are 4 years behind at any given moment, and that's a sort of a minimum, because most of the time we're studying national politics, which usually means the president and the executive branch more than anything else. But in addition, it takes us so long to get our work published. By the time that we get it published, it's been years since the actual event. One example of this is I wrote my dissertation in 2007, but I collected the data in 2004, and it didn't get published until close to 2006. So by the time that it got published, I'm sorry, not 2006, that's not what I meant, 2009. So by the time it was published, it was old data that was no longer necessary. So why does that happen? What does that do for us? How does that help us? Well, the first thing we need to do is understand the field. The sort of study of communication is relatively new. It really didn't become a thing until about the 1960s, when people in English departments started to say, hey, speech is important too, not just writing. So how are we going to teach that? And so rhetoric departments really were part of English, and therefore speech was part of English. Anybody who pays attention, of course, would know, and I don't mean you all, but in the scholarship would know that rhetoric in English departments tends to focus on writing, grammar, the structure of a book, of an essay, and of course, creative writing is not something that rhetoric usually gets itself involved with, but although there's a huge debate there. And then, when we split off, meaning the speaking teachers, when speech sort of formed its own national organization and moved away from rhetoric departments and started to grow, they started to get departments that were actually large enough to stand on their own. So no longer were the people who studied rhetoric in speech, particularly, meaning persuasion, no longer were they in English departments, they were in communication departments. Now, why is that history important to us? Well, because rhetoric in a communication department, particularly when it leads to the study of political communication, does concern itself with the old classics like Aristotle and Plato, and some philosophers from history. But it also likes to think that it focuses strictly on the process of communication, of creating and sharing meaning between individuals, right? So that process is what's most important. So when people ask me, okay, what do you study? Well, I study communication, specifically the process of how we create and share meaning, which I believe is a definition from Pearson and Nelson in 2000. How do I apply that? Because isn't that everything? And the answer is no, it's not everything. Let's just start there. But secondly, my particular interest is in how that works in a functioning democracy, right? Or a democratic republic, as is the case here, even a parliamentary republic or parliamentary democracy. So how is it that I study that? Well, within the field of communication, political communication is sort of a small subset, right? You have your interpersonal communication scholars, you have your intercultural communication scholars, organizational health comm, all of these different sort of divisions within the field. I like to think of them as different crops growing in the same field. So the soil is important and fertile and needs to be studied, but the crops that we grow are a little bit different. In other words, the knowledge that we hopefully contribute is a little bit different because political communication scholars you might find are extremely terrible at interpersonal communication. And we're better at things like actually, despite extremely terrible coming out of my mouth, usually in English, history, philosophy. So what is it that political communication does then? Well, there's really two ways to look at it. One is what's often called the social scientific way of looking at political communication, which looks at sometimes effects, sometimes efficacy of a message specifically. Sometimes it requires a social science, pseudoscientific, artificial environment for people to be studied and for their communication to be studied. For example, some work that I've done on the implications of race as a topic in political advertisements came out in a book that I believe was centered around moment-to-moment political interactions and being able to test that because we have the equipment here to do that, which is honestly kind of cool. And so that got me a couple of book chapters in political science, more than it did in communication. Why, you might ask? Well, most of us in the communication field follow into the constructivism position. That paradigm is more important to us, and so we like to do more, if you have to look at it this way, qualitative studies. We're more interested in that process from a content perspective. What is the content and how is it being shared? Those kinds of questions make more sense to most of us in communication and when we study political communication. Now, there is a whole world out there studying the other type of political communication, and I obviously have been trained to do that, and I have obviously published in that. So it's not like I'm completely ignorant of that. It's important. The study that you read today is this week was definitely more social scientific in nature. So what I tend to focus on when I study political communication, though, is sort of a broader idea of what political communication may encompass. Excuse me. You may know that I teach the social movements class. That social movements class I consider to be a political communication class because we're studying how groups that work outside of the government, leadership outside of the government, apart from government and state agencies, how they communicate about political issues. So that whole class is dedicated to political communication that has absolutely nothing to do with political figures, political leaders, political offices, and institutions. This course, however, is focused on those political institutions, those political, like parties, for example, the branches of government, the types of speeches that we get, and in some cases, how people talk about their involvement with the government. My dissertation was on generational differences in how people talk about themselves as part of or outside of the political system, so to speak. Now, what's important here about the changes that have been made to political communication is the timeline. And so one of the things that you may notice is that on our syllabus, and I'm going to pull it up here for myself, in fact, on our syllabus, I believe that I have things sort of in a chronological or a time order. In looking at that time order, we will see how different technologies affect politics, but that's not our main focus because that course is a different course. Excuse me, that's communication technology and politics, which is usually taught in the spring. I think somebody might be teaching it this semester, I'm not really sure, but that's where we focus really on how comm technologies impact political communication on the national level. That's normally what we're looking for. For you all, then, what is it that we're talking about? Well, we're talking about political communication in the general, the different types of study that we do, the different paradigms that we might come from, and so on. Still, we take sort of it won't pull up the syllabus for me, but I believe it was written in sort of a chronological and spatial order, and I finally got it to pull up. So here we go. What we really want to know are to answer the big questions about what political communication may entail and how that's changed. But most importantly, what I want you to be is conversant in political communication. That means that you have opinions that you are able to substantiate with evidence of any kind, be they narratives, be they statistics, be they all the different types of evidence that we can use. So really what we're talking about here today is, can we have a political theory, or are there theories about political communication? Well, next week we're going into the history and therefore the chronology a little bit more. Well, let's just start with this. I started studying political communication in 1995-ish when I was a sophomore in college. I started studying under several people who had different perspectives on how to teach political communication. I was taught by a journalist who taught political writing. I was taught by a philosopher who talked about rhetoric and the importance of understanding how the government and the people are linked through rhetoricians, for example, but also in how they communicate with each other, where the vote is considered to be the communication of the people, and the policy that comes out from the government is what comes from the government. I've had professors who teach from a very scientific perspective, that they would create these sort of artificial environments in which we test how people respond to things, or we do focus groups and find out what they think of certain messaging. And that really gets into much more of the content than it does into just the numbers of efficacy. Most political scientists study voter behavior. That's not really my game. That's not really in the realm of political communication as such. So what we're looking at is the content and what impact that might have as we speculate as political communication scholars. What do people do with a political communication degree is probably the biggest question I get asked, and it is vast. So I've heard people refer to political communication as a niche field, and it's really not. It's not. What are some of the jobs that I have sent my students to out of this program and out of our master's program? Well, yes, a few of them went on to become PhDs and to teach, but that's not always the best goal, okay? Other people who I'm very proud of have done some awesome things as communications managers or communications directors for campaigns, who have actually run campaigns, who have run for office. Now that's the standard. You'd expect that, right? But we also have the regional director of Planned Parenthood. We have, and actually there were 2 or 3 of those that went through Planned Parenthood of Southwest Missouri, who were my former students. There's one there now who still is, or who was my student who's still there. There is the person who initiated the Medicaid expansion for Missouri that I don't believe that passed, but she created a movement and started the petitioning and going to the government and lobbying. And we also have lobbyists that have come out. Maybe they were interested in environmental issues and they get a political communication degree. And the next thing you know, they're lobbying for environmental issues to either the government or to corporate America, or to or working with multiple environmental groups at the same time as advisors, as consultants. We've had people who have started their own. I've got one student who I'm thinking of who started his own LLC. It is to basically fundraise for, in his case, Republican candidates in Missouri. He's located up in Kansas City. But we also have people who do polling in D.C. who don't lean one political way or another. And that the Hawthorne Group, who you may or may not have heard of, was started and is run by a graduate of this program. Now, he predates me, but I've met him a few times, and we've had students go through his internships, and they end up staying in DC and doing wonderful things. There are people who decide to stay around here, and there are people who decide they want to go to Jeff City, and there are people who decide they want to go to a different state or go to Washington, DC. We have sent people everywhere. It is important to understand communication from any government institution to the people. By the way, this includes the CIA and the FBI, where we have sent students to both of those, which is pretty exciting, I guess. Well, for them it is. I personally couldn't pass the physical, but I, love that they went there. So usually people who study this kind of thing in college, when they study political communication as part of their broader communication program, they are able to do things like also go on to be journalists, go on to be talking heads on TV, to start their own YouTube channels. And like Brian Tyler Cohen, I don't know if you guys watch him or not. If you don't, you might enjoy him, you might not. I enjoy watching Brian Tyler Cohen. He's got a couple of different podcasts and YouTube channels, and of course that's how he makes his living. But he is, in my opinion, a fairly well-educated and has some sound observations about politics. He definitely leans a little bit left. I'm going to say a lot left, and sometimes I'm like, Brian, that's a little too far. To go that far to say that, but we have a lot of people who lean right too, and that's part of our job as political communication scholars, is understanding where the arguments are coming from and what we're supposed to do with those, so that we can help other people understand how the government is functioning and what supposedly these things are supposed to do for us versus what they do for us. And when I say these things, I'm talking about policies from the local, state, and federal level. I'm talking about what politicians are saying. I'm talking about even sometimes court cases that come out. Some people like to study the Supreme Court's decisions, and in our field we do that too. So that's sort of what the field looks like. You've heard me mention everything from newspapers to television to YouTube to podcasts. I have not yet mentioned Snapchat because I don't think that's going to fall under our purview. But things like Instagram and Twitter, or X, whatever I'm supposed to call it, do. Now, I was sitting in a College Democrats meeting the other day, and they were talking about getting information out to you all, and like meeting times and things like that for people who were interested. And I was like, well, I do have a Facebook page we could use. And I literally felt the whole room just fall silent. And I suddenly realized how old I was, because most of you don't use Facebook. And that's like for us Gen Xers, we Gen Xers are huge on it. Like, we think it's the greatest thing ever. It's how we share our information. I understand you all don't do it that way. Instagram, I only kind of sort of understand. Twitter, it makes my head hurt, but I'm on it. I've got like 4 profiles on it. One of which includes the name Dudashisms, because sometimes, this was years ago, students created this Twitter because sometimes I would say things and they were just like, I have to tweet that right now. And so that's still up, although I'm the one who's running it. It's something that some people still tag me in, which is kind of funny. So there are people my age who use that stuff, but we're not good at it. And so when we study new media, social media, I'm going to rely on you to tell me what's going on more than you're going to rely on me for that. I'll lay the groundwork, but then you need to help me figure out what to do with it. And I hope that's sort of exciting for you in this class. It's not like you're just going to be sitting here listening to me ramble on all the time. We are going to get you involved. I am not happy that I'm teaching this class online. I think I've said that before, but I understand the need for it, and actually in a way it does protect my health, which I'm not going to complain about. So we're going to do the best we can to make this a little bit more interactive, hopefully. I hope you can look forward to that. So the question on the block this week was, can there be a theory of political communication? In 2015, as we moved into the 2016 election, because as we all know, they start a year or two early now, I remember saying to someone, oh my God, all of our political communication models are going out the window. And I said that in 2015, and I meant it, but it was sort of like some of our models are going away. How are we going to teach certain things now? And instead, by the time we got to 2020, it was like we don't have any models anymore. There's no political communication theories that work anymore. What do I mean by that? Well, we used to look at things like who the non-voters were, what messages could reach a bipartisan audience, what do we need to do on a mass scale for leadership, and how do I create those messages in debates or in my stump speeches or in a town hall discussion or in an interview? Well, that has all changed. We literally don't need those things anymore. There's two reasons for this. The first is that political communication has always been about influence on the mass audience. Influence on the mass audience. And so we are now in a world where you put things out for individuals, and sometimes they, the term go viral, and they become a mass influence. And you have influencers on these different platforms, and it's hard to gauge that. It's almost completely 100% unpredictable. Right now, my husband and I, we didn't realize that we were this cool because I didn't realize that this was like all the rage. We have a list of shows that we watch on Netflix, and we just have been going through that list, and we finished our last one. And so we moved on to Suits, which was the next thing on our list. And apparently everybody's watching reruns of Suits now on Netflix. I don't know what made that so popular, but here we are. So he and I started watching it, and last night began a case where the lawyers have to deal with a 16-year-old girl who has 5 million followers and is an influencer and is literally defaming one of the clients of the firm, one of the makeup clients. And it's fascinating to watch this sort of 45-year-old guy struggle with trying to understand why she's so important and why she wants $10 million and a bunch of other stuff. I mean, and I'm sitting here going, the damage is done, dude. It doesn't matter anymore. But catching up with technologies as the generations move through is not exactly a new idea. And so maybe there's something that we can use that for. But if you ask me, how does Instagram influence the mass audience? I have no idea. That's something that I need to figure out as a political communication scholar. Or do I? Because if I only study mass influence, do those kinds of things count? Obviously YouTube does, because it functions kind of like television, right? And Twitter, yeah, you get one thing out there. I'm not really sure how many people honestly see it, and if they do see it, how many people truly understand it. I follow several people on there, not the least of which includes Josh Hawley. I follow Lucas Kuntz. I follow George Conway. I follow as many as I can handle, but I'll be honest with you, I don't read all of it. right? And if I do read all of it, I'm not getting in depth with any of it. So what we are living in is a world where, second problem, messages are getting shorter and shorter, and that's not necessarily our attention span, because really if our attention spans went down as quickly as they were, we wouldn't have any attention span. And maybe that's the case. I'm willing to listen to an argument for that, but literally if our attention span is reading a headline, what was it? It used to be, 40 characters, and it went up to 140 characters. Now I think it's unlimited on Twitter, X, whatever the heck we're calling it these days. But ultimately, those two reasons are the problem. One, what is mass influence anymore? And two, how much mass influence or influence at all are these types of programs that are sort of one-shots? It's kind of like when you drive past a billboard that's digital. If they don't leave the ad up long enough, you don't see it. You just see this flash of color and then you move on. Or you see a word and then you move on. But those replay over and over and over again, and I'm not really sure how Pinterest, X, Insta, and all of those work to have that kind of influence. I just don't think they do. But that is something that I need to study and understand. So I'm going to count on you all to teach me about that a little bit more as we move through, because you all are the experts when it comes to those new social media sites. You want to talk about content? I've studied Facebook, I've studied YouTube, I've studied television, I've studied film, advertisements. We can do all that. I'm good with that. I am not good with the new social media. So hopefully that's something that you'll help me out with. Those two, to me, are the biggest reasons why we simply don't have models of political communication that we can rely on anymore. At least we don't have that many that we can rely on, and we definitely don't have any that apply to the new social media. We can apply it to Facebook, and I could talk about the difference between Facebook and other forms of new media or new social media, but I can apply it to certain things. My cutoff is really when we have these one-shot deals that, I don't know, a few people may see. Even if you have 2 million followers, how many people are really seeing what you wrote, and how many people are digging into what you wrote? How much information can we really get out there? Those are the questions that I generally tend to have. So if you were to ask me the question that I posted, which was, can we have a political theory, a political communication theory or theories? My answer is maybe, but right now we're still sorting that out. We're still figuring that out, which is why I had you read the article that I had you read. So here's what I would like to do now. I am going to go ahead and put up a question for you on the discussion board that won't be due until next Friday. I always give you a week. On Monday or Tuesday of next week, and it will be Monday or Tuesday. If you don't see something from me by Monday or Tuesday, there's something wrong. Please email me or text me again like you did this week. But by Monday or Tuesday, you will have another article to read. This one will be easier, I promise. This one's going to be a little bit more about the history of political communication, because that's what next week is all about. So I hope this helps you understand why I had you read that article, what that article might mean for you. Maybe you even need to go back and reread it. I know I do, just to try to understand how new media is sort of impacting the way that we study political communication. And that's where we're going to start, and we'll go from there. So have yourselves a good weekend. I'll see you on the other side of it, and I'll see you on the other side of it quickly after the weekend. Please, again, let me know if you don't. All right, everybody, talk to you soon.